While our next three folks, while Joe turns off his camera and his mic, and our next three folks gather, I just want to say that these three. So it's Deputy Chief Arlinda Westbrook, it's Ms. Mary Howell, a civil rights lawyer in New Orleans, Mr. Ted Quant, a civil rights activist in New Orleans. I don't know, Ted, if that's probably not the word that's broad enough for you, since you were also the former director of the Columbia Center for Peace and Justice at Loyola, as I recall. But these three are going to talk to you, and these three are a fascinating team because they not only were all instrumental in bringing EPIC to light in New Orleans, but now they're all intimately involved in giving EPIC a national platform with ABLE at Georgetown. So Ted, Mary, and Arlinda, I turn the mic over to you, and I'm going back on mute.
Hi, Jonathan, thank you. Can you hear me? Jonathan?
Yes, yeah, I went back on mute. Yes, I can hear you, Mary, perfectly well.
Good. I'm going to start out, and I've got 5 minutes, so I'm going to talk really fast. And thank you for giving the opportunity to do this and for the great work that you and Christy are doing in putting this program together. I've been a civil rights lawyer here in New Orleans for over 42 years, mainly dealing with police misconduct, and I'm sad to say I've been very busy. I've been involved in many lawsuits against LPD involving police misconduct. I've also represented police officers and counsel police officers who were whistleblowers and who came forward under very difficult circumstances to report misconduct or to refuse to participate in it. And every one of them suffered severe retaliation, which we were, for a number of them, we were successful ultimately in getting some kind of justice for them. But it was a terrible thing to watch what these whistleblowers went through. And for decades, we've had repeated cycles. I started looking at them almost like domestic violence cycles, where we would have these terrible major incidents and crises involving police misconduct. There would be these periods of reform. We're so sorry, here's the flowers, here's the candy. We're going to change our ways, things will be different. We'd have a period of lull, and then we'd go into backsliding, and then we'd have another big blow up. And I'm looking at that over 40 years plus of doing this, and throughout those various periods of time, in fact, New Orleans had one of the reputations, one of the worst police departments in the country. And as the Department of Justice has told us, it has a long, troubled history. Almost every one of the major incidents that I've been involved in and cases involved in addition to officers who are violating the law, engaged in active misconduct, engaged in brutality, there were bystanders, with probably the one exception being sexual assaults. I've also represented victims who were raped and sexually assaulted by police officers. But almost every one of the incidents where we had bystander officers, these are officers who knew that a civilian's rights were being violated, had the opportunity, could have done something, said something to intervene and stop it, and instead they did nothing. And those cases have haunted me over the years, because I kept asking, why would people not intervene and stop this obvious miscarriage of justice and stop these terrible incidents? And these were often cases where we had what I call the exoskeleton police accountability. We had the civil lawsuits, we had the criminal prosecutions, we have many officers who have gone to prison for these acts of misconduct. We've had disciplinary action, we've had early warning systems, we've had retraining, we've had policy changes, we've had all of this exoskeleton, but it still was not enough. And when we went into Katrina, we saw, and the whole country saw, sort of basically the collapse. I always say that Katrina didn't cause the collapse of our New Orleans Police Department. It exposed what was going on here, but it became painfully clear to all of us that what we were doing wasn't working. And that something had to change. And in particular, there was one case right before Katrina that haunted us, and it really illustrates what we were up against. And again, ironically, this involved a field training officer and a rookie. And it was about a month before Katrina in the Treme neighborhood, broad daylight in front of countless witnesses. Field training officer stopped Raymond Robert, an African-American man waiting to do some handiwork for one of the neighbors. And at the end of that encounter, Mr. Robert had been beaten, had injuries that ultimately resulted in his death, while the rookie stood by and did nothing and did not intervene. And they ended up trying to cover up the beating. Eventually they were prosecuted, both of them by the feds, and were both convicted, which is an anomaly, in federal court. That field training officer is now doing 22 years in prison. The rookie did 5 years. But again, this is that question of how could the rookie, and we understand the cross-rank issues, to stand by and to watch this happen in broad daylight in front of all these witnesses and do nothing. This haunted me, and it haunted, I think, many people who heard about it and learned about it. So there was nothing new about this. The legal duty to intervene is well established in the law. It's well established in civil lawsuits. It's well established in the criminal law, that duty is there if you have knowledge and the opportunity to intervene and fail to do so. But what happened is that there was almost every case, the officers remained silent, except, as I said earlier, the ones who did speak out, often at great peril, and then they would run straight into the code of silence, like Joel talked about, and they were often the subject of retaliation, shunning, de facto into their careers, and end up leaving the department. So all of this history has provoked a discussion we've been having here for, I think, decades about what to do about bystander officers, what to do about preventing these problems. And we were very fortunate to run across Irvin Staub for myself in the early 90s. And I was so troubled by Rodney King. This is 29 years ago, it was Rodney King. And we think about the cameras are going to make a difference, but in fact, that was also filmed, and with the bystanders who stood by and why nothing happened there. And we were very lucky with Christy Lopez working with us with the Department of Justice and getting bystander intervention into our consent decree. We were extremely fortunate to have Joel here, Chief Harrison, Judge Morgan. Finally we had a harmonic convergence. A lot of people were asking these same questions. And the question is, how do we prevent this stuff? Not what do we do after it happens, but how do we stop it from happening? Most of our machinery of police accountability is after the fact, after the harm and injury has taken place, after the code of silence is kicked in. And that's what's different about this. It's starting at the point of impact and saying, stop it there before it keeps going. We've already seen some results in New Orleans that are positive, that people are talking about it. Arlinda will mention, but I want to say a couple of things. This is not a panacea. We've also had failures. Even since the training has gone into place, even since the consent decree has gone into place, we've had failures with some special task force units. We've had a lot of controversy here about what happened with the New Orleans Police Department and handling the protests on June 3rd on the bridge. So there's still ongoing debate and struggle and controversy happening here. But what we do know is that this program can reduce harm, it can reduce violence, and it can save lives. And you look at we've been having this conversation for years. We've got Rodney King for 29 years. You can go back and look at Raymond Robert, 15 years, Eric Garner, 5 years. We're having it again because of Mr. Floyd. And we need to stop having the conversation and actually have real change. And I think that EPIC and ABLE are a vehicle to try to make that happen.
Thanks, Mary. Now we're either Ted or Arlinda. I don't know who's next. It looks like Ted unmuted, so all yours, Ted.
Thank you. My name's Ted Quant, and the first thing I want to do is say thank you to Jonathan and Christy for launching ABLE. It was only a few years ago that many of the people speaking here today were invited to the New Orleans Police Department to help with their reform effort. It was at one of those meetings that we decided to make peer-to-peer police intervention the engine of cultural change in the NOPD. I remember saying at the end of that meeting that we needed to take a picture because this was a historic moment. I feel that way today about ABLE as we take that vision to a national level. I spent 50 years protesting the police, protesting against police brutality, and 30 years trying to bring about cultural change in the department. At Loyola University in the late 1980s, we held classes with the police and community, people from public housing, to dialogue and train together. A core element of that training was Dr. Staub's research on the power of active bystander intervention. The training benefited those who participated, but confined only to a few officers, it was ineffective for changing the certifiably brutal culture of the New Orleans Police Department. Culture demands assimilation and exclusion. That is true for corrupt police cultures, and that is true for EPIC police cultures. Leaders determine which culture will prevail. Leaders decide which values and behaviors get rewarded and which ones get punished. I don't just mean administratively punished and rewarded, but how in a day-to-day performance of police work, peers support each other in implementing the new culture. Let me tell you a story to make this point. 30 years ago, Patrolman Joel Sylvie and Sanford Johnson acted on what they had learned in the Loyola program about bystander intervention. They saw a fellow officer brutalizing a handcuffed Black teenager. Normally, they would have kept going, but they looked at each other, and without saying a word, they knew they had to go back and intervene. They had to physically intervene to stop the brutality. That's the good news. The bad news is that they were punished for doing the right thing. The leadership supported the culture of non-intervention and going along to get along. But that was then. Today's department leaders are the leaders who led the creation and implementation of EPIC. A veteran policewoman told me it was really bad back in the day, but now, for the first time, she is seeing real change and she is hopeful. Here is the kind of positive EPIC story that gives her hope. As you know, a principle of EPIC is that it gives permission, in fact demands, from the lowest ranking officer to be able to intervene with the highest ranking officer to protect each of them from making mistakes or doing harm. This is a story about a young rookie police officer, a woman police officer, and a commanding officer working in the French Quarter. There was some women in the street selling these drink shots, which was not legal in the location where they were. The senior officer was telling them they can't sell the drinks. The women were arguing with him. Why are you always picking on us? Why don't you go catch some real criminals and leave us alone? Stop messing with us all the time. They escalated, arguing and cursing in defiance. The senior officer was being very professional and handling it, but the rookie could see that he was about to lose his temper and go off on these women, and there was going to be some mess. So the rookie touched his sleeve, got his attention, and stepped in as if to say, I got this. Now the senior officer gives her a look like, who do you think you are telling me what to do? And she pointed to her EPIC pen. When she pointed to her pen and he sees this, he stepped back and she took over. She de-escalated the situation and got compliance from the women. And as a result, there was no negative incident. EPIC creates stories that are never told because nothing happened. But something did happen. An incident was prevented. The rookie was really proud of what she did. She created a verb. She said, I epicked him. EPIC creates many untold stories. Let me close with this one. I was at a meeting and I was talking about EPIC. Afterward, a man I know who often has bad run-ins with the police came over to me. He said, Ted, something strange is going on. The police are being nice to me. They're asking me, how am I doing? And do I need anything? It's scary. Indeed, it's a scary good thing, what is happening today. So thank you all for being here today, and that the launching of EPIC of ABLE is going to be a great advance for our country and for police department and for people everywhere. Thank you all very much.
Yep.
Good afternoon, everyone.
All you, Arlinda.
I'm Arlinda Westbrook. I am the deputy. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Good afternoon again. I'm Arlinda Westbrook, Deputy Superintendent of Public Integrity Bureau, here affectionately known as Internal Affairs. I've served as a senior attorney here in New Orleans for about 23 years. I've served in this capacity as Deputy Chief of the New Orleans Police Department for the past 10 years. Mary Howell and Ted Quant came to me very early on to discuss a mechanism of driving internal affairs out of business. They communicated the need of getting a program to get officers to intervene before misconduct occurred. This program will be driven from the officers level, created by the officers and the rank and file as a mechanism to change the culture within the NOPD. I was intrigued and willing to listen. I will speak candidly of what I have seen over the last 10 years as the Internal Affairs Deputy Chief to what EPIC's role has played within the New Orleans Police Department, and more the last 5 years of my tenure. For a few moments, I would like to discuss PIB's role in the EPIC program. As Jonathan said earlier, we knew very early on that we had to have a very limited role, but we do in fact still have some form of a role. PIB works directly with NOPD's Officer Assistance Program as a way to mitigate discipline when an officer has accepted intervention. This can assist in the prevention of possible use of force escalation or obvious substance abuse or mental health issues. Some of the services include when we have a DI-1 in our office or a formal complaint, we work with the office so that we can make sure we can mitigate any type of damages and any officer. And brief counseling, stress management, alcohol and substance abuse, referrals, requested help, and we have taken immediate action to assist in the intervention. What we're trying to do in New Orleans is provide a support for the officers when in fact they intervene, and to provide a support mechanism to intervene when it's officers before any form of misconduct. As Deputy Chief of PIB, I have the authority to mitigate discipline. Mitigation is about whether the officer has accepted that intervention or not. One of the things that we have done is a major part of our close and effective supervision. Supervisors are utilizing confidential referrals and are used to getting officers their assistance specifically tailored to what they need. EPIC is not just a tool for intervention for misconduct or policy procedures. It can be used to also intervene in health and wellness, as you heard Dr. Debachin talked about earlier in this program. Peer intervention is a nucleus of ensuring high quality ethical policing by encouraging fellow officers speaking up and stopping a wrong act before it happens. It is the way to promote safety for both officers and the community. It is necessary for officers to understand that peer reporting is supported without fear of being shunned or retaliated against by other officers. Peer intervention in New Orleans as incident could be the difference maker between life and death for officers and citizens. This is why we believe that the intervention training that NOPD officers receive today is invaluable. Peer intervention training has been the difference between most officers' suspension days or loss of life or loss of job. EPIC, what I'm happy about, is now being expanded into a national program and is assisted in expanding all of the work that we've done here in New Orleans. I thank Chrissy and I thank Jonathan for all their help in getting this program started. Because now as an internal affairs director, I have officers now coming to me to report misconduct. And also it is driven consistently over the last 5 years. Our citizen complaints have been driven down and our rank initiated complaints are up. Because supervisors are now intervening and feel that they can intervene without fear of retaliation, this EPIC program now launching into ABLE will now be a national model. Thank you, Jonathan.
That was amazing. Mary, Ted, Arlinda, thank you all so much. You all continue to inspire me. Please, you can turn off your mics and cameras now, and we're gonna move on. Just a reminder to everybody that if you have questions as we go, you can be typing it in to the Q&A function, and they'll be compiled, and we'll see if we can hit any of those at the end of the event.